St. Matthew's Gospel, um, chapter chapter 2, verse 1. And then we also see that the Messiah will be born of a virgin is a fulfillment of Isaiah's prophecy in chapter 7, verse 14. And we see that being fulfilled in St. Matthew's Gospel, where the virgin did bear a son, and then he would be called Emmanuel, and that's what's found in verse 22 and 23. That this Messiah, the son to be born of the virgin, will be called God would be called Emmanuel, the God who is with us, or God with us. All right. So I'm hoping when you guys get the time, and you can try to write ask to write your papers on the book that we've been covering for this in the fullness of time. You can find other events in the life of Christ to point that he's a fulfillment of Old Testament prophecy. All right. Any questions there before I move on to the lesson 2? And so we can just try to keep the time.
Nope.
Okay. At any time, you can raise your hand or put something in the chat if you have a question on anything I say, okay? Next is lesson 2, the historical and cultural background, right? So we know that in the context of the early church, when Christ is born, if you're a person who likes history, well, I like history. We know that the Roman Empire has now taken control of most of what we know as the European countries that are around the Mediterranean Sea, right? And most of Western Europe, not all of it, but a good majority of it, a good chunk of Eastern Europe, but not all of it. And then Northern Africa, and then going into the Middle East, right? And that's possibly because even before that, we know Alexander the Great, who was Greek, had conquered with his armies. And we know that as an Indian church, we know that he made it all the way to present day, Pakistan, Afghanistan, and the northern parts of the northwestern parts of India. He made it that far, right? And so we see that the cultural background in which Christ is now born into this world, the time that God has chosen to be revealed and taken flesh, is during this context of this Greco-Roman culture, which is, for the most part, we see that that's the beginnings or the foundations for current Western civilization, right? Not all of it, but it's a big part of it, and which Christianity is a big part of the Western civilization, not the only one, and not the only culture that it influences, but we know that it has that big influence, right? So one of the key things that we're mindful of when we look at the historical and cultural background, as Joshua Hudson mentions in lesson 2, because of this ability of the Roman Empire to conquer many places, after many years of fighting and conquering, now there's a relative level of peace because of the country, the Roman Empire being very vast, but very mighty and well organized, right? Under the reign of Caesar Augustus, now there's a stable government that exists from about the 27 BC or BCE onwards until after Christ, until about 60, 70 CE, going to the hundreds, and then slowly by the time of the 3rd century AD or Common Era, we see that slowly that starts to break down, right? But for the most part, a very extensive or well-organized empire. Like I said earlier, it expands from Western Europe through Northern Africa to Turkey and Palestine. They had an excellent communication system by both land and sea. The main language was Greek in the Eastern Empire, Latin in the Western Empire, and then Common Greek, or known as Koine. Koine, or was this language spoken by most, and that's the language that we know that biblical Greek. The biblical New Testament is written in this type of Greek. So this Koine Greek is also known as biblical Greek. At the same time, when you look at the historical and cultural background, Roman law was a very sound legal system that brought justice and peace, right? Meaning it was very well organized. There was a good system of checks and balances to a certain level, not completely like today. And there's also we'll talk about some other the negative parts of the empire, but they had all these things going for it to allow for God's plan to be able to, have the message of the gospel be preached to many different places, and to have that ability to do that is because of the foundation already laid by this Roman Empire. And the map of the Roman Empire, you see the red is the west, what is known kind of the Western Empire. The green, the blue is the the Eastern Empire, and you can see that where the red they spoke mostly Latin, the blue they spoke mostly Greek, but the common language was the Koine Greek that was common to both sides, right? And so we see that influence by the Roman Empire, and we saw that we see here in the Middle East where it says Tyrus and Damascus. We know that in Gaza, right here is where we see Jerusalem. You know, it's not marked on the map, but this is where we know that the Holy Land or Jerusalem and the Nazareth and all the places where Jesus walked and during his public ministry is all found in these places, right? And so we're mindful that this is the time of the Gospels and the Book of Acts. This is the known kind of empire in which it operates. Some more cultural historical background. There was still, even with all the great advancements that the Roman Empire had, there were still many negative parts to the empire, and it was some of those. One of the key things is the social inequalities. Even with all the political unity and stable government, there was a great deal of social inequalities, and that's based upon because the Roman Empire had conquered so many different groups, right? And the groups who were not Roman or Greek or that Western or that European kind of background, they were made as slaves. Or if they didn't conform to their way of living and worshiping, they're made as second-class citizens, or they were made as to be as slaves. That's why we see even during the times of Christ, the people were waiting for a new king because the Jewish people did not want to fall under the pressures of the Roman Empire and the Greek culture, right? They did not want to. They believed in the one true God, not many gods, but the might of this Greek and Roman Empire is bearing down on them, and they're being forced to be part of it because they've conquered all the lands around it. They're forced to pay taxes and to be tolerant, at a minimum, be tolerant of, and to be forced to have them be around them, and to kind of pull. And the Roman Empire is hoping that they'll just kind of adapt and just change their way of life to be more like their way of life, right? And so that's a big one. So that there's a lot of slavery and inequalities amongst the different groups. At the same time, if you're rich, you did well. If you're poor, you are very well you are not well off, or you are very much in need, right? You are much living day by day, sometimes even hour by hour, right? Because there was a lack of social equality amongst, depending on if you're Roman or not, right? And we see that in the Gospels and in the New Testament, right? Even St. Paul himself was able to, because he was a Roman citizen, was able to claim that so that he could go to Rome and to continue to preach the gospel, so that they had to stop the Roman soldiers from beating him and that from arresting him as the Jewish people wanting, because from his preaching, but knowing that there was something special about being a Roman citizen. So if you weren't one, it was very much difficult for you living. And then, as you know, like we read from the Gospels, the Roman taxes were very much a burden or very unbearable, as Achin writes in the book. And so that's kind of the context of the time of when Christ is born here on earth, right? And so, another thing that we see about the cultural background of this Roman Empire is the diversity of religions. We have the pagan worship, the emperor worship, and many mystery cults that sprang up that had similar teachings to Christianity, but had it in a different way, right? So Christianity was able to adapt many of these Greek and Roman ways of living, but make it conform to the Christian way of life, right? So then you'll see that later too, about many of the heresies that the church has had to fight against is because of the mixing of these two. And so the good things where the church is able to adapt and show how it points to Christ, things that aren't, they have to cast off, say those are not in line with the message of the gospel. Okay. One of those, and in line with that, one of the big mystic groups or cults that sprang up that kind of sprang off of Christianity, or kind of latched onto the Christian message, was the group called the Gnostics, or known as Gnosticism. It was a mystery religion of the first century, AD or CE. They believe that salvation, it was only attained through the gnosis, which means wisdom, specifically found from the mystery cult itself, and only for the select few are chosen. Gnosis is the Greek term for knowledge. And we get the word knowledge from that. The GN is like the KN in English. So you had to have that special wisdom, but it was only given by a select few within that group, right? So salvation was limited to the select few who had that knowledge, right? So there was a great deal of emphasis on philosophical discussion and living an ascetic life. Ascetic life meaning like kind of like the monks and the nuns living a very austere, very limited, like not casting off the things of the world and living kind of out in the desert kind of thing. They are very much in line with that kind of living, but knowing that that's how you obtain this knowledge outside of Jesus Christ. They're saying they have the knowledge of that how to obtain the salvation, right? And so many of the New Testament writers, particularly St. Paul and even St. Peter, wrote out against, and St. John the Apostle in his epistles wrote out against this Gnostic movement, right? As we know, also in addition to this, there are a lot of diverse philosophies during this time. There's, the Greeks and the Romans were very much big into philosophical inquiries, which was a great attraction to the intellectuals. That's why we have a lot of universities starting to spring up because of all these people are wanting to learn more. And so it's not necessarily a bad thing, but they focus more on just philosophy, the love of wisdom in terms of human knowledge, and at the expense many times at the revelation of God, right? But not necessarily always opposed, but at the same time, we have to find that balance. So one of the big influences was the philosophers Socrates and Plato, which we know that from history they had a strong influence on the Greco-Roman world from the 5th century BC onwards, right? Another big philosophy or way of life in this Greco-Roman world was Stoicism. It emerged and became influential after the 4th century. Good life equals life lived in union with the universe, right? So they're pretty much finding that this harmony of saying how do you live or to know the good and to live a good life was based off of living in union with the universe. They feel as God is a pervading force amongst the universe, and in Him we live. And the moral teaching was very close to Jewish teaching, so not necessarily anti-Christian, but at the same time, it's without the message of the gospel and Jesus Christ, it's very limited in how much it truly shows the good which we find in Jesus Christ. Another group that we read about during this time is Epicureanism. It begins in the 4th century BC. They feature a concern of the world with an outlook on morality, right? So we see like this common thread of the early philosophers trying to live a good life, finding the good, right? The moral good, right? And so, but at the same time, this Epicureanism is very much looking at following one's own natural inclination, meaning whatever you feel is good, that's what's necessary in life. That's the only thing, or that's the only thing that's necessary. So whatever makes you happy is good, and you're the only way to qualify or quantify your good life is to avoid pain. So the more that you enjoy and have good feelings, and you avoid pain, the more good your life will be. And so we see that's pretty much when you listen to these things, these are philosophies and ways of living that are still found to this day, or have been adapted even to this day, right? And so not much, even though we're many centuries removed from that, but at the same time, we see that the church has had to deal with these kind of teachings or this kind of morality or this equivocation of moral living from the early beginnings of the church, right? Okay. The last lesson I'm going to try to hit today before we get to today before we wrap up for 6:30 is lesson 3, is the Jewish historical background of the New Testament. We know that from the 1st century of the BC and AD or BCE and CE, the people of Israel were struggling under the foreign yoke of foreign domination, be it the Greeks or the Romans, and they are waiting for a Messiah, right? So under foreign rule, beginning by the 2nd century BC, they were under Syrian rule. particularly the Antiochus Epiphanes, who was a Greek after Alexander the Great. He was the one in charge of that Middle East, so that based in Syria, or what we know as modern day Syria, and he overtook the city of Jerusalem, and he tried to wipe out the Jewish religion and culture and replace it with the Greek one. This fight, or this kind of struggle of the Jewish people with this Antiochus Epiphanes is found in the book of Maccabees, which is you can find in our Orthodox Study Bible. And even though the Jewish people don't have the book of Maccabees in their scriptures, but they do celebrate what happened during that time, and that's where we get the celebration of Hanukkah, when they were able to finally kind of break the yoke for a certain amount of time of these Greek worshiping gods away from Jerusalem. That's why we have this Hanukkah, because they were able to their forefathers were able to fight against this pagan worship and bring back the worship of the one true God, at least for a certain time before the Romans come and overrule the area, right? And so by the time the Romans come, after all this civil war happening in Jerusalem against the Greeks and the people of Israel, or the Jewish people, now the Romans take over and they enter Palestine beginning in the 65 BC, and then they stay, until the fall of the Roman Empire, right? At least in different levels, but until then they're there until the Ottoman Empire comes. One of the key things we need to look at this little picture that I found online. This is we see the Greeks and the Romans, entering the Jerusalem temple, right? And they're trying to now cast down the Jewish worship and now bring about their foreign gods into the Jewish temple. This is what when we read the book of Maccabees, this is what they're fighting against, to stop the pagan worship within the city, particularly within the city of Jerusalem, right? And so this is what the kind of the background. This is what they're having to deal with, right? This Roman domination and this Greek philosophy and pagan worship. We see this them now struggling. That's the time of when Jesus is born, during this constant struggle against this Roman, this European rule over the people in Israel, right? So during the time of Roman dominion, they take over rule of Judea, and from the time from the Maccabees, they were very efficient administrators. Herod the First was appointed as the first, or was appointed as a regional administrator. He was known as King Herod the Great, who ruled over Judea during the time of the birth of Jesus Christ. And then later, it was divided amongst his sons into the different regions, right? And so his three sons, we have Archelaus. He surpasses, he was known as one who surpasses father wickedness. He appointed dismissed Jewish high priest on whims, meaning he didn't care. But he had the authority to pick who was the high priest. And so he just did. He never cared about the people. He just cared about controlling them, right? But because he was very known as a wicked person, his own family conspired against him, and then he was exiled to France and was replaced, right? There was a conspiracy that said that he tried to take over the Caesar, like he wanted to become Roman emperor, and so he quickly was banished from ruling. The other son, Philip, known as the brother of the other two brothers, he's kind of known for rebuilding the city of Pania, to be known as Caesarea Philippi, which we also find in the scriptures. He built up that city, and it was to appease the Roman emperor, right? Later on down the line, during the time of the early church, and still during this Jewish people still living within Jerusalem, we have Agrippa the First, who was a great persecutor of the Christians, as we read in the book of Acts. Agrippa the Second is one who had discussions with St. Paul. And then we know that there were different Roman procurators or governors, and during the time of Christ, and we know that Pontius Pilate was the one who condemned him, or who ordered him to be crucified. And he was a fifth governor procurator during that time, right? And so this is a very quick kind of backdrop of all the different things that we see, how the Gospels and the letter and the book of Acts, the the travels and the works of the early apostles in spreading the gospel. This is all the kind of the background that we see the early church in bringing about the message of the gospel to be preached and to be spread out into all places. Okay, that ends my presentation part. I just want to give some, because I wanted to give time for any questions or comments or any kind of clarifications before we talk about what we'll study for next week. But this is the kind of a quick overview of the background information of the gospel and the book of Acts. I'll leave it there and see it open up for questions.
There's a couple of questions on the chat, Acha, if you want to.
Okay. Let's go back up. Okay. Okay. Well, I see the first one. So I know someone put the map. I said map in the chart. Was there a question about the map, or is it just that you just added to the map over there? Oh, you had another map. Oh, sorry. Okay. And then there is not an Oriental Orthodox study Bible that I know of. It's just mainly just the Orthodox study that's given by the started by the Orthodox Church here in Americas, like the Antiochian Church and many other the Greeks and the OCA who helped put it together. I don't know of any other Orthodox study Bible written by the like our church or the Coptics or the Syrians or the Armenians. Did we mention the Christian adapted certain? So then the question becomes, what the reading mentioned that Christianity adapted certain Greek thoughts that are some examples of Greco-Roman philosophies. There's many different examples that people kind of highlight or can mention. Some things are just very general, right? So some of the things about being able to see and to understand the goodness of God, or to know that like a lot of the Greek philosophers understood that there was a higher sense of the good, right? Right? They understood that there is the particulars that we find on earth, and there's the universals, which is found in the spiritual world, right? And so we understand that what they're seeing is just something spiritual and above. Maybe in particularly, they always say divine, but it's a divine that's all encompassing. We'll say that's found in the one true God, who is the creator of heaven and earth, and found in the person of Jesus Christ, right? And so the good, when Jesus said that, when they asked him, is he the good teacher? And Christ says, no, there's only one who is good, which is God. But we understand that Christ is also the Son of God, so that one Saint John writes in his gospel, God is love and God is good. We know that it's referring to that God is the perfect example, the perfect sense of what it means to be good, and what it means to be love is only found in God. It's not just found in our observations here on the world. When we know that these are examples of a big universal or a philosophical idea of something greater than us, a divine or a higher power, we understand that being truly found in the God who's revealed to us in the scriptures, right? And so that's one of them, the seeds of truth that we can kind of find in the Gospels. And in a similar way, when we talk about the Gnostics, they said there is a certain knowledge that's needed to obtain salvation. In a certain level, we understand that that's true, but not a secret knowledge. It is the knowledge and the message of Jesus Christ. To become partakers of the salvation, we need to be partakers with Jesus Christ, right? So it's not a secret knowledge; it's a knowledge that is being spread and preached to everyone, and so that it's not limited to just a select few, but is open to all people. But it is a knowledge that is necessary and needed to obtain salvation, right? And so those are kind of two quick ones.
So the next question is about a controversy. That's if you can read that. It's about virgin in the Hebrew version translates to young woman.
Okay. Is that virgin who is the virgin of the Old Testament, that young women that implying there's okay, and that's it's fine. You mentioned that young woman. So back in the olden days, young woman usually is, even if you can translate that as young woman, is technically or would typically mean a woman who is before marrying age and before engaged in relations with a man. So when even if it's taken as young women, it's referring to a to some degree it's highlighting the woman part. The biggest part is the virgin who is to bear a son, right? And so it's true. It can be taken one way or the other, but then the biggest thing is when we look in the Gospels, in the message of Jesus Christ, that's where the fullness of that verse in Isaiah that the virgin or the young woman is to bear is found to be. It's not just any woman or just a young woman or a virgin woman who's going to be married and she's going to have a son after she's married. No, in the message that the angel has given to the Mother of God and Saint Mary, it's that she is to bear him without the knowledge of men, right? So that's where the fullness of that Isaiah reference is fully understood, and that's why even in the church tradition, some people will discount it, but the church tradition states that there was even a saint of the church, which we remember on February 2nd, when we do the Maialto, or that when Jesus is presented. We know that there was the Saint Simeon and Anna who are remembered, and Saint Simeon was known as a saint of the church because the tradition states historically he was one of the men that was he was one of the men who are tasked with translating the Old Testament from Hebrew into Greek, because there was by that time, a lot of Jewish people were living outside of Jerusalem who didn't speak Hebrew. And so there was a need for it to be written in Greek because that was the common language of the time at the time of the in the world at the time. And so when he gets to this passage, he goes, that doesn't make sense. How can it be a virgin just do it to bear a son? He says, and he looks to change it, but then he gets a vision, a voice or a vision saying, don't change it. You'll be able to see this happen. And so it says, that's why he's seen as a young man, as an old man. He's now, when he gets to the time when Jesus Christ is born, now he says, I have seen the salvation of this message now being made manifest or being made true, right? And so that's where our church also highlights that even that passage, though it could be interpreted in many different ways, in the message of the gospel that has been revealed to us in Jesus Christ, it's not just any virgin or any young woman, but truly a woman who has no knowledge of man is now the one to bear the Son of God. And because that's the only way that it would make sense that for a true God to be in the flesh, it's not by the actions of man, it's by God's providence to take flesh from a woman that who he sees as the one that that was able to carry him, right? That had the humility, as we know Saint Mary had, to be able to carry him and to bring him, so that he can become incarnate and become the savior of the world, right? So then it's a fair point, but we said that it's only fully understood in the message of the gospel. That's why we said in the beginning that the quote of Saint Augustine, the Old Testament finds its full meaning in the New Testament, right? Okay.
Quick two more questions. One is about, has Jews still considered special?
They're still special in one sense. The being chosen people. But at the same time, from a Christian context, there's no more old Israel. Now only the new Israel, right? The chosen, which is the church, right? So just as Christ desires that all people come to the knowledge of the gospel, it is our responsibility to preach that to all people, particularly including the Jewish people. They're still special in the sense of they're descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and still hold the Old Testament, but they cannot sit on just being Jewish, right? It's an acceptance of the gospel which makes them partakers of the fullness of what God's plan for salvation, right? And so though they're special in terms of they're Jewish and that's who God had chosen for his message to be given, that doesn't save them, right? It's found only in accepting of the New Testament, the gospel message that's found in the New Testament, that allows them to fully inherit what it means to be the children of God, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And so why does not Judaism recognize New Testament? Because the Jewish people still tonight, they don't believe Jesus is the Messiah. So they don't believe, they're still waiting for the Messiah to come. That's what it means for Jews. That's what current Jews to this day still mean. They're still waiting for that Messiah to come.
Is there an English translation that is approved by the Church, Holy Bible?
Meaning, in Malayalam we have this Bible Society, but the proper one, the church is the one that's taken from the Sureni translation. That's what the original Evangelions in for church use is the more, and that's more based off the Septuagint or the Greek translation of the Bible. For English, New King James, and particularly even the Orthodox Study Bible is good, which is uses the New King James. I'd even say the Revised Standard Version is a good version. RSV or ESV, those are ones that are still faithful to the original the languages, be it the Hebrew or the Greek or the text of the Bible. And so those, you have to find texts that are faithful to those things and not interpretation. There's a lot of new Bibles now that are interpreting more in a in a cultural context rather than when the context of what the church is meaning, right? And so that's what we would look to.
Thank you, Acha. Thank you. First of all, let me thank Achan for a very nice session that we have here, and also an apology that somehow the license did not get applied to this class, and that's why this 40-minute whole thing happened. So my apologies. We will work on that, get it corrected the next time. I mean, the next class, that's next Sunday, same time. And if there are any additional questions, feel free to write to DSW Divya Bodhanam, and we will get that answered. This session recording and also the slides which were used for this class, all of them will be shared over the WhatsApp, and also you will be getting your registration numbers this week that will be used when you send your summaries, which is end of the book, not end of the session, but end of the book. When you will start doing your summaries is when you will need those registration